So this is my setup moment, is it? You've been so nice to me, and now you've got the left-hand curveball coming in, and that this is now an interrogation.
It is, but you should be prepared for it.
63866
That's what you gotta
WRM
say.
Hunter.
That's it. All right, Bob Hunter, welcome to the Range Project.
Thank you, Steve. Lovely to be here.
Now, you've got a pretty impressive career. You're a former SAS Commander. You've worked in business consulting and operational leadership. You just finished a role as CEO at Rugby WA. And you're a man who wears many hats. And I hear on good authority that, digging up dirt on you, that you're actually quite a flamboyant, fancy dresser.
Fantastic. I was wondering when that one would come in. Now that's the opening line. Yes.
That's the opening line.
50th birthday, there were 5 costumes, just so you know.
Right.
All good.
And are they alter egos? Is that correct?
Many would worry about that.
Okay. All right. We'll get on to some actual
serious
questions
stuff
now. Yeah.
Go, boys.
We might chuck that one on the end.
Yeah. Give us your best.
Can I start with the next
Go
one?
for it.
So we understand that you were a student at Hutchins over in Tasmania, and we got a bit of a connection with Hutchins through Rob McEwen, who used to be the head of senior school, who's now the headmaster over there. So I guess my first question is, taking you all the way back to your high schooling career, what was it like to be a student at Hutchins? Yeah,
look, I reflect back on my time at school as one of those periods that was a fantastic learning opportunity. It had sport, it had the structures of learning some education, some skills that would help me get into where I aspired to go to. I also had some time in the cadets at school, so it had a multiple range of opportunities, and it was a boys' school, so very similar in culture and an outlook to Scotch.
Okay. And you were into rugby, were you, at the time?
Yeah.
Any other sports or mostly rugby?
Oh, no. Look, Tasmania is one of those sort of places where rugby's not the main code in winter. So there were a couple of seasons where I may have had a go at other things. So AFL, kick to kick all the time. Cricket was a big part for me in summer. I even played the round ball game for a season.
And do you think playing sport set you up for any of the skills that you had? Or did you possess some of these kind of leadership skills naturally, or do you think sport helped you along the way?
Yeah, it's one of those questions that, particularly where I then went to Duntroon, the question is, are you, a natural leader or can you learn it? The answer is you can learn it. But I had some, I had some attributes. I had an opportunity at school. I was the head prefect in the last year and had some leadership positions through that. So the school encouraged that. Sport gave a genuine other stream to evolve and practice and learn those skills. I was a team captain, a state team captain for rugby, and a number of other opportunities came my way, which I was very fortunate to have.
So what else would you say Hutchins is kind of known for? How would the Tasmanian community characterise a school like Hutchins? Yeah,
I think if I use that holistic learning life experience, how do you engage with the community? It's very similar to Scotch. Look, I'm a Scotch parent. My son Max went through Scotch, and I saw many of the same characteristics, attributes that I recalled from my time there. Now, I wasn't a parent then. I was just, a schoolboy fortunate to go through a good school. But parents worked hard to enable that for us. So I see it as that holistic. There was sport, there was cultural activities, there was the education, there was the interaction with, fellow schools, female neighbours in and around the Hutchins community.
Can I just maybe pivot a little bit now to your family life back then? What was life like in the Hunter family? What were your parents like, and What was their approach to education?
Yeah, my father was a doctor, came out of the UK, and Mum had met Dad while she was also serving in the Royal Navy. They were doing their national service, as was wont post-war. Both of them grew up as World War II children, so they had some of those experience in their DNA. And those attributes, I think, stood them in good stead because they emigrated to Australia, came to Tassie. Dad took up a regional medical officer down on the Tasman Peninsula, in and around a place like Port Arthur, which is more well known to people for its convict past and its tourism highlights. But what that meant was they came out as, settlers, came out with no friends, family, any other. So if I can take something from that, they demonstrated a strong resilience, have a go, get things done mindset. Dad as a doctor obviously worked long hours, very hard, but Mum as the household manager of three boys and my sister Sarah. She was a remarkable woman in terms of what she enabled for us, and also modelled for us around one of her great expressions: just get on with it.
It would have been quite hard back then, I imagine, if you're living in Tassie, somewhat frontier-like. You have to do a lot of things yourself, solve a lot of problems yourself.
No, it certainly was in that part of the world. It's
and did you absorb
regional.
a lot of that?
Oh, look, I was a young fella. I don't have great recollections of it, but as time went on, it became, part and parcel of how we lived our life. Just do things.
Yeah.
Don't fuss too much about it. Climate was always a part of living in Tasmania. So if it was cold, wet and windy, we were still going out to do something. And technology and multimedia streams didn't really exist. There were 2 channels on television, and I remember the transition from black and white to colour. So I'm sorry, boys, I'm already over something you wouldn't have any idea about.
So, what can I ask? What were holidays like for your family? Were you in the outdoors a lot as a family, and did that? I'm trying to sort of think about.
So again, like every family group, and I think it probably equates to a little bit of what some families have recently experienced with the whole COVID thing, is actually getting out as a family and doing something local. So Dad, as a doctor, worked very hard, long hours. But when he took his time off or a couple of weeks off, we went away. Now, some of it was to mainland, but mainly within Tassie. We had a couple of locations. We had a place we went down for summer holidays on the Tasman Peninsula, one of those links that Mum and Dad had made great friends with when they were there as the young doctor and his wife in the Tasman Peninsula, a remote area. We would go back there regularly for a 6-week summer holiday on the orchard. We'd live in the picker's hut, and let me tell you, the picker's hut didn't have anything other than bunk beds and a long drop.
Pretty modest.
Pretty well. But, that was just part and parcel. We were out and about. We had the bikes, freedom.
So you think that sense of resilience that you got throughout that time helped guide your career choices?
Oh, in the wonderful time since, you look back and you go, sure, absolutely. It helped frame your points of reference around if Mum and Dad could deal with that, I can too. And then when I had my own experiences across different life ones, I'd quite often remember back to that wonderful catchphrase from my mum.
Just get on with it.
Just get on with it.
So if we can fast forward now a little bit to the next phase of your life, you finished at Hutchins, and then what happens next? Okay,
I applied for the Royal Military College, Duntroon, which was a 4-year sort of mix of 3 years academic in a military environment, and then your 4th year was essentially military leadership, and then you would graduate as a young officer, a lieutenant in the Australian Army into one of the corps. So I applied and was lucky enough to be accepted fairly late in the piece, but got a Guernsey, and I'm off to uni. So that was, again, left literally out of home, 18, just turned 18, and off we go.
And so for you at the time, it wasn't necessarily a sense of this is exactly what I wanted to do in life. Necessarily, this is just something that, that something to do, and then it grew. You grew into a love for the
absolutely.
army, or is that how it works?
No, look, I if you show me an 18-year-old that knows exactly what they want to do, then we'll say they're the abnormal, not the norm. So I thought it had some wonderful potential. I had actually originally thought about going into the Navy because my father had served in the Royal Navy, but I have a slight colour deficiency, which meant I couldn't serve in the Navy as a deck officer. So I would have had to go into the more logistics-based stream.
Okay.
I think I'm more of a sort of doing type person, so I said, righto, I've been in cadets, had a sense of, some structures around the military, and that sounds like a career opportunity I'd like to have a go at. So did I know whether it was it?
That vision didn't impact your SAS selection at all?
No.
No, okay.
No.
Right, I thought that impacted air services, but...
That's all right.
Yeah.
The end state for the SAS is there's a lot more time on the ground than falling through the air.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Should we move to SAS time?
Sure. Look, there's probably a couple of stepping stones out of the whole Duntroon as an educational institution that in the context of what you guys are, talking about is that organisation gave you a sense of the importance of leadership. It didn't make you just the best leader. It gave you the values that you needed to instill in how you enacted the role. And so when you graduate from that, you then go into a core.
Did you develop your own leadership style at that point? I know you've talked about distributed leadership, which is something that I really agree with, and something that, providing challenge for everyone within your team or your organisation. Is that something you learned at Duntroon, or is that something you developed yourself?
No, it was very much a part of the organisational learnings. When people come out, they want you to have some pretty sound fundamentals, lead by example. Don't ask people to do things you wouldn't do. A couple of core ones that could be well used by a few people across a number of other leadership roles. But so being engaged through that 4-year period, you get a sense of how important it is to understand what you're doing, making sure you're communicating well, engage your team. So the term distributed means everyone knows what's going on. At some point we might have to make decisions. It might be a crisis moment, a contingency moment, or I might need some democratic input just to get a sense of what we all think the right idea. But at some point you then make the decision, and as the leader you get on with it and communicate and implement it.
Seems relatively progressive for that time. Like everything that I've seen, which is essentially movies.
How good.
It's just the leader yelling orders at someone. Did you have leaders like that? And how?
Of course. Look, I think the way to think about leadership in the military as opposed to the movie version, because otherwise everyone just runs around in singlets and carries big guns. The important thing around that the art of leadership is understanding what the problem is, having a plan to work through it, and then know that your plan will shift and change. So if you're not effective in how you communicate and engage with your team, then you're not going to get a solution in that sort of very dynamic environment. So I certainly didn't come out of Duntroon other than with some pretty standard, these are the best practice, this is what works, this is what's worked in times past. So then once you get into your unit, your organisation, remembering there's a whole range of service skills in the military that aren't just your 101 infantry, tanks, aviation, engineers, specialists, transport, so a whole plethora, which means you're going to have different environments that you then need to act and lead and behave in. So mine happened to be infantry, which is then what flowed into why would I like to try and go to the next level, which was then SAS.
And that you really want to have mastery, purpose, and autonomy for your own personal motivation. How do you instill motivation in your teams when they're potentially unmotivated? Can you get past that?
Yeah, and so in the military, was that a big issue? Not so much. You're there for service. You sign up to the military with a service mindset. You don't sign up just for a contract and an hour's paid and a work thing. If it's 24 hours of work, then it's 24 hours of work. So that mindset and that manner in which you operate in the army in particular is a little easier to then motivate people, because it's, well, just get on with it. It's the reality we've got to deal with it. If you transfer that, though, outside of that environment, then you've got a very different context in which you're trying to motivate people. So the context, whether it's in or out of military, if you give people a sense of why we're doing something, its purpose, and how it fits in, you've got a real chance of motivating anyone.
And I imagine at Duntroon, that kind of training, the environment and the stakes are high. It's very clear to you. I think a lot of students finish their bachelor degree, let's say at UWA, and perhaps don't necessarily see the stakes of what they're learning so much. How important it is as to what they're learning. And it sounds like that was a great education, a great starting point.
Look, I think part of it was that whole environment created a sense of purpose to graduate. Not just the degree component, very important. It was, how do you demonstrate you can, think logically, communicate effectively, whether you did sciences or engineering or arts or anything more specialised, which is what the service now offers. But then the sense of purpose, you're going to graduate and I'm going to a job. And that job is going to be pretty hands-on first up. So I'm 22 years old. I'm promoted and appointed in charge of an infantry platoon of 30 young men, and it's in the parachute battalion. So those young men are anything 18 to 22, 23, and they're there to be engaged, work hard, be fit, earn some money, have some fun.
Yeah, well, that brings us to this SAS training, which I'm fascinated about. When you first arrive, when you arrive day one, SAS training, if you cast your mind back to that, what is that like?
Nerve-wracking, but also the point and the training that had been done to that, it was not unknown. It's just how it was going to be, how it would manifest itself. And would I be physically up to it? Most importantly, would I be mentally up to it? They were all the unknowns. I'd done X hours of training. I was probably the fittest I've ever been, and was able to get through, in the end, most of the fitness elements. But it was then, how did I perform in the team? How did I perform working in a problem solving with the things that wasn't just the physical, but it was how mentally and how demonstrated team and leadership attributes in that course.
You push to your absolute limits, right? And you need to be able to perform certain tasks at your absolute limits. What did you learn about the deepest part of yourself through that phase?
Yes, the $1 million question. Learned a lot. None of which was perhaps unknown, but learned what the limit was in terms of your physical capacity, and then go another bit, and then go again. Learned that tests and benchmarks weren't necessarily the reality. We're doing a 20-kilometre route march, and we knew we had to do it in a time. Suddenly that time passes and you're still doing the 20-kilometre route march, but you reckon you've gone faster and further. But, taking away those little points of surety so that you were unsure, giving you sort of some negative feedback, perhaps not of the... There was a show recently on telly. I haven't watched too much of it because they just shout at each other. So the end state around, that whole selection was actually try and find out the true person in terms of not just their physical, their mental, their wellness, how do they work with and fit in with other team members, and then as a leader, how do they then do that and have some leadership aspects.
Did you have a sense in the midst of that early training that you had a capacity for certain things that perhaps a few other blokes didn't have, or were you just as nervous as the other blokes in the group as to whether you were going to get through it or not? Or did you have a sort of confidence around that?
Yeah, look, I'm a vaguely confident person, but built usually on having planned and prepared and trained. So I knew I was capable on the physical side. I'd done some time obviously in infantry, so I knew I could plan and do some of the soldier things. But then it was again, how was it perceived or seen as to whether those things were real? So those were the unknowns. And also the fact that, getting woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do some exercise which you thought had no purpose, destabilises you. So everyone's in that same boat. But you could also see others who were struggling, and if you weren't, then you knew, okay, well, I'm perhaps in a slightly better place. Ultimately there's only X spots and only X people are going to get selected through. So it is, there's a degree of competition to it as well.
It seems like, I think this is a term you might have used, developing confidence in the unknown. It seems like that training and that career path is something where you have to be extremely confident in the unknown. You're being put into situations where you've planned for as best you can, but you really need to be a full Swiss Army knife to really find the tools within your skill set to solve them.
I think that the term would be adaptive. So that if you come across something and you go, right, there's plan A, we could do this, and then if you put it in the military context, you're usually going against an opposing force. Now, the nature of that opposing force will depend on the nature of your operations, whether it's a full-blown war environment like Afghanistan, or it's a peacekeeping in the Middle East, or it's the truce supervising or starting up a mission in somewhere like Bougainville. So each of those environments is going to be different. So you've got to be adaptive.
And you don't know who the opponent necessarily is sometimes. So it's hard to be combative.
That's right. So again, it brings that sense of the importance of making sure you're able to adapt and shift, and always just go, okay, well, if plan A is not working, let me try plan A and a half. And if that's no good, how about we shift to something like B? And then at some point being ready to just go, all right, that ain't working, we need to do something else. Now, you can take all of those principles and not just apply it to the military. And that's where I think it's important that whilst a lot of my fundamental early life experience and work experience was in the military, where I've then gone and done something in commercial life was using that same principle and making sure that you didn't just get set in a pattern. I've used the expression a number of times with different people, never set a pattern. But, some people will say it's important to find something and repeatedly do it, but it won't necessarily always apply.
Yeah, you talked about feedback loops in the training you've received. What does that mean?
Okay. SAS in particular is very good at this. It's part of how do we communicate effectively to make sure everything is known in the same way it's actually intended. So one of the feedback loops was sort of the leader, the commander, so whether it's a troop commander or a squadron commander, which are, units of, say, 25 to 30, and a squadron's up to 100. So I led both of those. In different times, you are giving some form of task, problem to solve. So you would give the big picture. This is why we're doing this, is where it fits in. So commander's intent is a fabulously important part to how the military works, but you can call it vision in a commercial business. So if I've got that and I know my role or my task fits in to achieve that commander's intent, then I know where I'm trying to go with my plans and my problems. Because then as the leader, I am not giving that unit, this is how you must do it. I am giving them the resources, I'm giving them the task, I'm giving them any constraints, what they can or cannot do. In military parlance, it's a mission profile. So I give that information and say, how about you go back, you work it out with your team, you think about what's going to work or not work. And then I want you to come back and give me a brief back of what you've understood, so that if I've intended something and it's not been understood, we have an opportunity to evolve our mutual understanding. It's a very nice way of saying, I've got the same idea as they have. I'm not telling them how to do the job, making sure they've got resources or not.
Pretty applicable to teaching. Right?
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Well, could I just say it's applicable to anything?
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time in different businesses, and part of the problem is there's not an effective feedback loop. Do it this way, like this, because that's the way we do it, not because there's a better way or I've listened to the Steve or the Sam and you guys have got a better idea, but we only do it that way.
People need to know why they're
correct.
doing
And I think that structure, and whilst it has a military connotation, I've used it in whatever I've done. Try and be clear on the big picture. This is why we're doing it. This is our role. This is how we fit, whether it was in the rugby community team or it's in a coaching role as a team of young footballers or whatever it is. And then if you evolve on those same principles, then you're going to get a lot more clarity around what we all understand, what we're all trying to achieve. Because then when the problem happens, it's not, Bob, this is the problem. It's, here's the problem. I've thought about this. Here's my idea because it still achieves this. How good? Don't just tell me your problems, give me solutions. And really effective in principle, whether it was in the military or in the real world.
Yeah, we're going to, later on in the interview, we're going to look into some of the commercial stuff that you've been involved with beyond the military, but I just wanted to spend a little bit more time on the SAS. And,
sure.
And so you'd risen up the ranks through the SAS to become, my understanding is a squadron commander. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a number of officer roles, and then there's also a soldier stream, and it's one of the very strong parts of the military culture is you have your soldiers through to NCOs, so senior non-commissioned officers. So they bring a lot of time in rank experience, and they're like a mutual offsider at each rank level. So when I was a 22-year-old platoon commander, I had a late 20s platoon sergeant, and Sergeant Frank Jamison gave me great advice and some little hints. Maybe not that one, sir, today, but that's a good idea. Just some guidance, some mentoring. In the end, responsibility always still that. So the military does provide that, and that goes all the way through. So yes, I served as a lieutenant, then as a captain troop commander in SAS, and then came back as one of those great roles as a squadron commander, which is a major's role.
How does the SAS deal with PTSD? And I know you've been involved in some serious incidents in the past. How have you dealt with it, and how have you seen some of your team deal with it?
Is it appropriate perhaps to put a context on that? Because
I didn't know if you wanted to talk about it. Of
course. Okay, so I've just said it was one of the great jobs. I was the officer in command of one squadron, and it was the Counter-Terrorism squadron in the time in 1996. We'd taken on that role at the end of 1995, trained up for it, and it's a 12-month period where you are the first response to any terrorist form, attack, incident in defence of Australia, and also a capacity to potentially assist in offshore scenarios.
And can I just ask, where was all that training taking place?
Your nearest neighbour here, Scotch, just over the road at Campbell Barracks in Swanbourne, but there's also a couple of other locations in and around the Perth metro area. Right. But we'd also do a number of activities and operation, training activities around Australia. So one of those in June 1996 was with the Aviation Regiment, and it was a really important part of our air mobility capacity, working with the Black Hawks. They are a fabulous asset, can get you from A to B very, very quickly, and you can get from the sky onto the ground in some pretty rapid time, and they offer lots of flexibility. So we were doing one of those activities. We were practicing and rehearsing for one of those potential scenarios that was starting to evolve at that time, and it was offshore recovery. There was a guy called David Wilson was being held in in some form of jungle camp in Cambodia. So it was part and parcel of always being able to provide a service of last resort to assist the Australian nation. So we were practicing an exercise where we were deploying by aviation, by the helicopters, getting down, troops on the ground very, very quickly, conducting an assault through the target area, being supported by aerial fire support from snipers in helicopters. So the complexities of which are numerous. You know, flying aviation assets in proximity, live firing, people in...
I assume these guys would have been the best of the best too.
Look, highly trained in it, done a lot of work, and we'd worked through a whole range of workup scenarios through the course of that day. But no matter how well we thought we were prepared, stuff can still go wrong. And unfortunately it did on that evening. We were doing the last and the final activity. It was by night. NVGs and our helicopter formation had 3 line abreast, and unfortunately 2 of them collided, and that resulted in a massive explosion in one. It flipped and turned over. Aviation fuel from the second one had fallen on it. The second aircraft lost some of its tail rotor and was able to rotate down, but under heavy impact. So 2 helicopters had crashed. And the unfortunate reality of that was 18 airmen and soldiers died that night, 15 of those from my squadron. And they ranged from senior sergeants through to young troopers, all of whom had families, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, you name it, mates. So a devastating impact. So I'm not going to go into the event per se. You know, there was a whole review done on that in terms of the why, the where, the how, but in the end we still ended up with some significantly traumatised soldiers. We had injured, we had long-term maimed soldiers, and obviously most significantly though we had 18 people die. So the impact from that is quite simply everyone involved, and even peripheral to that, had some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not a nasty word in my view. It's just a reality of being in an occupation that puts people in harm's way, and therefore should have a way to help them deal with it. And it did. Some will always deal with it better than others, though. I don't think I've answered the question yet on the PTSD part.
Yeah, it's a big story to try and unpack.
So the end state is we have an event. So often, traumatic stress will come from a significant event. So people who were involved in that had it, were diagnosed with it, were given ongoing support, and each adapted and dealt with it in their own way, depending whether it was their mate, their husband, their father, whatever it was. And I can't speak for those folk, because each of those will have felt that in their own way, and it remains devastating, and it's always something that will live with me. Mm-hmm. So in terms of my own personal, of course I did. Mm-hmm. You can't be involved with that. You can't be the commander, whether you're in a helicopter that happened to have to sit flying above this as the 2 were burning on the ground and others were reacting and responding and doing some incredibly brave things, because out of that there were actually 14 bravery awards for people who responded to try and save lives, ran back in and out of burning wreckage, exploding, people with injuries themselves, some incredible stories. So Again, I seek not to belittle any of that, and or make it therefore about me and my own part to it. But post-traumatic stress is, I think, part and parcel of many of those occupations, and I have the greatest respect for people like our first responders in many other professions.
Can I jump into that exact point of time? Can you, and I imagine most SAS soldiers would probably be the same boat. Can you ignore emotion for the time where you need to get the job done?
Well, one of the aspects that people have then asked me to discuss is how do you then carry on as an organisation afterwards? Okay, so I gave you a little context that our organisation at the time was the Counter-Terrorist Squadron. So it was the last response, and it was the only response. There weren't two of us. So there weren't another unit that will just bring them in, give these guys a couple of weeks off. So if that was the nation's first and last response, then it needed to be reconstituted, and needed to be reconstituted very quickly. So we had a very short time in which to do that. So it became a regimental response. Soldiers from other squadrons were deployed in to cover those significant gaps. We'd lost leaders at all levels, troop commander, troop sergeant, highly capable people who'd been in and around the place for quite some time. So it wasn't just bring in some young fresh troopers. We needed capabilities at all levels. So the organisation responded and was able to reinvigorate that capability in a very short time. The reason I mention that, because it gave us a sense of purpose. It gave us something to focus on. So when people ask me about, what makes for resilience, is it being able to just get on with it and do something in small? Well, in part it is. It's suck it up. I can't do anything about that. I cannot change that. That has happened. I need to deal with this, and I need to deal with this in a move forward type basis. So we had no choice. And let me tell you, I think that was the saving of many, and with the old reflective lens on, I certainly put it down as being crucial for me, because I didn't have then as much time. And I was also very, very well supported by my own commander. The commanding officer, Mike Silverstone, then took on the hardest and the most emotive part, which was to make sure the families were communicated to, supported as best they can, whilst team, we're trying to focus on rebuild a capability.
Did you feel like leaving after that?
That's an interesting question. Not in the immediate after. There was work to be done. Why would I belittle the activities we were doing, the importance of those, and for those who were lost? So I had no immediate sense of that at all. So one of the outcomes from that wasn't just reconstitution of a capability. It reinvigorated, almost our collegians equivalent, our Old Boys Association, who had a very strong Vietnam linkage. Soldiers from that conflict had come back and hadn't felt as supported as they could. And so I think that then drove them when there was a moment of crisis in the organisation. Don't get me wrong, it was a moment of crisis. You cannot lose 15 men and not say it's not a crisis. So I don't ever get a sense that I'm just saying, we just washed over and got on with it. No. There was a hell of a lot of introspection, what we were doing, why were we doing it. There was formal inquiries, all of those sort of things. And in getting to the bottom of it, you do not lose life in any shape or form, and not make sure it's covered. But the point I was then going to was the heart of your question, is it really highlighted the sense of camaraderie and purpose and unity in the organisation. You don't join the organisation without being selected. You have a number who help and do a number of really important roles, but aren't necessarily go through selection course. And on the night of Black Hawk, a number of those people were running in and out of helicopters trying to help people as much as anyone who had gone through selection. So the sense of purpose of the organisation is profound. And therefore it carries on when there is an adverse and after service. So whether it's fellow officers, soldiers served with, well, it's certainly my view of it. Some will always have different views of those who've served. You may not have always been as popular with some people as with others, but I think on the whole you have a great sense of alma mater, camaraderie amongst all, no matter the generation and the like. And that organisation really stepped up to help. Again, it was another of those post-traumatic stress mechanisms, was support from others, sharing stories, communicating, not bottling it up. All lessons we know around mental health and mental wellness is, don't leave it just sitting in here. Make sure you're talking to people, find people with a kindred link or something that can offer some alternate perspective.
Communication seems a little bit less common these days in the traditional sense. How do you think, since those days of Vietnam, you've changed, or organisations have changed how they deal with PTSD? I mean, they got back from Vietnam and they would have been spat on and all sorts. Was your inquiry done with respect, and how has the approach to that changed over the last 50, 60 years? Yeah, look,
I think no doubt very different from those who served in a challenging conflict out of Vietnam. Great service, and in a conflict that wasn't necessarily of our making, but the same is for those who are recently serving post-Iraq and Afghanistan. No matter the political topics on that, there's more to that story to still unfold, but it's probably easier that I don't comment on it because I'm not integrally involved with it. But I think the journey that veterans, whether in SAS or others, is a little more supported now. I won't say it's perfect. It never is. There'll always be people who slip through the gaps, but there's an increasing awareness that anyone who's been and served in a conflict zone is going to have some form of stress, trauma experiences, whether it's formalised in a PTSD or the like. Doesn't make them a lesser person, doesn't make them a great potential workmate. And I think they're the important parts that people should have in mind as they look at those who've served. There is better awareness, there is better communication, there is support. Does it get everyone? No. Yeah, same across the rest of our society though as well.
So you came out of this harrowing experience basically for several years, I imagine, and then I'm wondering, because I want to get to all these other things you've done since then in the commercial world and beyond. How did you then go, okay, this is where I can, this is where I can position my service in other areas in the commercial world, in the consultancy world. How did that transition happen? Like, when did you decide, and where did you want to go?
So obviously the time as an OC in one squadron, 96, 97 through to the end of 97, post Black Hawk rebuild, carried on the role. Offered a couple of other experiences for me. I did a short notice deployment to Cambodia, which crossed over into a planning, a contingency, using your knowledge. So I was there to bring some skills and experience around in the event we had people who needed recovering from a conflict situation. Cambodia was suffering a little build-up, and as it turned out, it became a major coup where Hun Sen retook over the country. And we happened to be there as a planning group, which included some senior army, some Air Force, and a number of others that were planning a contingency operation for evacuation of Australian civilians. So we happened to be right there at the time, went through the coup, were able to do some of the planning and re-establish and be a foot on the ground immediately to help enable exactly that, a civil evacuation. And, it was those sort of wider, more strategic, regional issues that started to twig for me that there was more to it than just leading an organisational capability. And then the second activity that popped up and I was given an opportunity on was in Bougainville. So this is coming towards the end of 97, I think. Peace was breaking out in Bougainville, long-running conflict between the Bougainville Revolutionary Army and the PNGDF and the PNG government around the gold mining assets there. So this was again the re-establishment of trying to help the country, the peoples, re-establish some form of coherent law and order, structure, governance, everything. So it's a rebuild. And I was engaged on the planning team. The commanding officer at the time, Colonel Steve Josky, knew me from Duntroon days. There was a requirement for someone to fit in as a staff officer who had some, experience in the event that we had some form of, hostage recovery type event, albeit that we would have been on the ground and probably in the hostage recovery event, so a little hard for me to lead and plan if you're actually sitting there with your hands tied, but that's a secondary story. So anyway, it again did that, and that was another of those experiences. But part of the little trigger, and this is one where I'll bring my beautiful wife Nicole into the story, because it was also Nicole, baby Lucy, our firstborn, and I go into work and the boss says, Bob, we need this, you're probably the right man for it, you're going to go away minimum of 3 months, you can't tell Nicole where you're going, you'll have limited communications, it's obviously into a risk environment, you won't be armed, but these will be the blah blah blah. So one side of me is fist pumping, going how good, this is what, all the things I trained for and want to do. The other side then has to go home and sort of just say, look, I'm going away, I can't tell you this. And that went on again, off again, because I was going to go to Sydney for a day or two, but it really just triggered some of those other aspects that I like to think I've then had a red-hot go after I left the military. Was a bit more around actually fathering and being involved in the family. But aside from that, it was the last couple of things, and then, as an early 30s bloke, right, what do you do? Do you stay in the military? I know where that pathway can take me. A couple of my very good friends are our current, senior generals. So I knew the pathway, that there was an opportunity, but I didn't know what was over here. And that ultimately became the core decision. Am I going to have a go at something I don't really know, or stay in and do this, but then probably expect a bit more of this time away and not having as much as I would like to think I can in and around the family. And I'm not saying I've been perfect in that respect, just in case you watch, Nicole.
And around what age were you at that transition
30,
point?
34, 35.
Okay. And so what was next for you, Bob?
Okay, like every good ex-SAS person, who dares wins. Let's start a business. Any idea what we were going to do? Oh, well, can we do some of that sort of stuff we were doing? Security risk management, give advice to companies working in challenging places.
It sounds quite similar to the PNG situation.
Yeah, pretty well.
Bringing back diplomacy to...
Well, I think it was having had those couple of experiences and appreciating that it wasn't just sort of counter-terrorism, it wasn't just war roles. I'd had a year in the Middle East back in 94, where I'd served with the United Nations. And that was a fabulous trip. And I've been in Israel, I'd worked on the Golan Heights. Israel and Syria were at, breakneck levels of peace between the two countries at that time. And I then served 6 months in South Lebanon, where there was an active conflict going on between Israel, IDF, and the South Lebanese. So
I meant to ask you
Hezbollah.
that. What did you learn from the Israeli military?
Look, again, one of those highly adaptive, use technology, use everything they could to create an advantage because they were surrounded by people who didn't particularly like them. So they had to be highly capable, and they had some good technological support and armed support from larger superpowers. But it was, well, if no one else is helping, let's help ourselves. And if I saw that once, I saw it a number of times. So it sort of helps you with that. You know, you don't just have to have all of the big support mechanisms. If you need to find a solution, you can probably find it with an adaptive solution yourself.
So if I think about this ex-military consultancy
private
work,
security company.
Yep.
Some people might have used that term mercenary.
Well, this is what I was going to ask. Yeah, because I mean, in the
Because-
US, you hear about these infrastructure over there.
Look, it
for all
depends.
that.
Yeah, it depends where you are and what zone you're working and what conflict. All right. So we worked Southeast Asia. In '98, the fall of Suharto destabilised a fair bit of the Indonesian archipelago. So we had mining companies not in a conflict zone. So none of our skills were around that. They were about training local forces, getting them to a higher standard of performance, understanding what was going on, using some information and intelligence so that you weren't caught unawares by a road blockage because someone hadn't understood the information or whatever it was. So none of it that high end. The only time we ever did any high end stuff was post conflict in Iraq, and that was a very different environment. It's a bit like the old gold rush days. I've used that analogy before when people ask me. You know, every adventurer wants to go there. There's gold in them. There are hills. There's opportunity. There's challenge. There's risk. All the things they may or may not have done in their
It sounds like there
service
was a lot of money involved in those contracts too. Was that more stressful than anything else?
Look, commercially, we were reasonably mature. So by the time we sort of chose to go in and say, right, we can work in a very small space, quite selective, low profile. We're never going to be a big thing. We were a small WA-based company, but we had the right sort of people and knew who could work in that sort of environment. So we always wanted to try and go with smaller, smarter solutions, look like locals, fit in. We didn't need to drive around like big US companies or the like, because all you were saying is you're a target. So we picked a niche where we thought we could work.
So and you went off and did an MBA. Was that in the midst of starting that company or before that? Right, that's right.
Yeah, it started at the back end of my time in the military, saying, okay, if I think I want to do something commercial, then maybe I'll go and get some further education in that.
Yep.
Did you focus on anything in particular with your MBA?
Not really. I sort of I flowed through all of the component parts. I found organisational behaviour and leadership of interest, and also of challenge around some of the I'm doing this, yet you're writing this.
Yeah, you would have had a lot of experience to draw on, I'd imagine. Condensed
Well, I
experience.
thought so.
Yeah.
So anyway, I passed. I completed that.
That's all you need to do.
Oh well, but it was it did also broaden my mind to a whole bunch of part. But I was running a small business. Small business don't have HR departments, marketing departments. They have me.
Yep.
Okay. So small business, you get on, you just find a solution. A marketing plan, all right, that's a one-pager. That's what we're doing, that'll do. Yeah. We got a website, let's go. And be as smart as we can around that, but I don't have whole departments doing this stuff.
Back to the days of Tasmania where you got to solve all your own problems.
Well, I was a young adult, so I didn't have to. Mum and Dad did that.
Yeah.
So then you did this study, started this business, and then when did you start to go, okay, I can start to share my leadership skills or qualities in a sort of transferable way to help other businesses or that kind of thing, that kind of consultancy, because you got to tailor that then to the business that you're trying to serve, I guess. So how did that happen?
So again, perhaps if I go back to, and again, one of those other life-defining experiences, whilst we were doing that work in Iraq, One Friday, one of the business partners there, Pete Towndrow, an outstanding man of great planning, character, lifelong buddy. He's talking to one of the guys from the UN. The UN says, look, we're getting close to this phase where we need to run the ballot registration in order to run free and fair elections. They haven't been run in this country for quite some time. Part of the problem is we were originally going to use all the US forces, but that's not going to work, and we're just running a bit tight on time. So we're after any companies to come in with some ideas, put in a submission on how to act as security force, manage that, have an Iraqi feel to it. So some quite distinct parameters around which they needed that task. So Pete, a couple of us sort of having a bit of a planning, we could do this, we could do this. Well, we're not going to be able to compete with the big companies who'll just use lots of gun trucks and drive it all over the country and then, run the little centres. So he said, well, why don't we use our favourite thing, choppers? Well, there are no choppers working in the country. There's no, never say never. If you don't put it up,
put it on the bill.
Have a go. Put it on the bill. So we did. So by Tuesday, we were told we were probably going to get that contract.
How were you confident that you'd be able to bring choppers into the country? That seems kind of a difficult thing to do.
Yes, when in doubt, just speak loudly and confidently. Haven't you heard that one? It's it was one of those massive ones. Yeah, but again, we knew they existed. We knew they worked in a whole range of countries, Africa's, the stands around Europe. So it wasn't like we didn't know that. We had some contacts who could who knew someone, and so we were able to get them
and could sort of expedite the process.
Yeah. Well, so cash will do that. The banking system in Iraq didn't work, so 6 million in cash that needed to be transported across the border is one of the great stories of that.
Wow.
In a couple of backpacks. So that bloke Pete Towndrow I mentioned,
wow,
he's an outstanding man. He got them across, and because then we were able to put it into the banking system in Jordan, and then able to use it, transfer it.
Wow.
Yeah. So
okay.
so the stresses, the adaptation, is that a massive issue? Yes, it is. Is it a contract threatening issue? Yes, it is. But there was, all right, well, you want it to happen. You don't have a banking system. We need to underwrite this. This is the deposit. How are we going to do it?
Did the people that gave you that money know how you were going to get it across the border?
Yes, of course they did. Look, in the end...
that is definitely... I'm so glad you touched on this story, because that's one you're probably not allowed to tell us all the details.
Well, no, it goes to the heart of your question, because you said what then enabled me to think that I could then go and offer advice to companies around leadership and problem solving and teams. It was exactly that. Because I've done all of those things. We did this. We did it successfully. We enabled a workforce of 400 in under 6 weeks, which included a significant component of Iraqis. So we built teams. We said, here's the team, there's a number of expats, we'll use military, here are the rules on it, no big pardons, you've got to be at this standard, and you then have to work as a multicultural team. No ifs or buts, but we'll make sure you've got capacity. You look after your backs, and they'll look after yours, and so on. So a whole range of problem solving, team issues, communication, planning, adaptive planning, distributed leadership, making sure everyone had capacity to do their task. That whole commander's intent, and then giving people as many resources, constraints, plans, whatever it was, so that they could get on with the job without having to keep coming back.
I imagine that would have pushed you to your absolute capacity. Were you sleeping at all through that period?
That bit I said I was trying to be a good parent? Probably not. But in the end, we've taken on a task where there's a significant commercial imperative to it, as well as risk. For every upside, if you get it right, you can end up with a profit. You don't, then wow, money's gone very, very quickly. So, people expecting to work in those places are being paid at considerable value equations, but there's also real risk. It wasn't a picnic. It wasn't a pretty place to work. So anyway, the summation of all of that is, again, using those planning skills, those organisational skills as a team. It's not Bob, let's be really clear, but our team of people, leaders who were involved in it, and there were a whole bunch of really good people, managed to enable that. We did the registration phase, and so that was a sort of two-month contract. You know, I think broadly it was around $30 million US because of the number of assets that needed to be done. We worked low profile. We had adaptive systems so that we never told pilots where they were going, so no one could compromise them. We didn't set patterns so that it was every Monday or Tuesday, whatever. That way we were reducing the risk and the profile, and we did that. And because it worked successfully for the registration phase, I said, well, why wouldn't we give you guys what you quote to do the whole collection? So we said, well, mirror that, we'll do that. And again, you know, small company, good idea, adaptive solution, not what the big guys were doing. I think there were a few noses out of joint, but anyway, we got the job and we got it done. And so at the end of all of that, you know, you end up with what is a life-changing, you know, for us, you know, as a family, but as a business. But we weren't trying to then be a multinational corporation. That wasn't our mode. That's what we'd said we didn't want to do. So we tried to stay at the same small to medium enterprise. That business still carries on today, and is you know, is a great solutions business in the world of risk management, not in places like Iraq Day.
Oh, amazing.
Well, conscious of summarising your life in our short podcast, how and why did you get your role as CEO of Rugby WA? Did they approach you? Was it an advertised position that you got there? And
But this is a simple one. No, this is a simple one. I'm a lifelong rugby nut.
Right.
And knew a couple of people, and one person had shifted on quite simply.
But there must have been a skill set that you had that they needed at the time.
Oh, look, as it turned out, it proved, I think, a valuable insertion of someone with a bit more experience, without prejudice to those who work in sport. Sport is often a stepping stone between some steps in your educational journey, so you don't necessarily get people with a lot of experience. It doesn't pay very well. And quite simply that then means you'll get people trying to learn some of the things as they go. I'd learned, so I wasn't trying to be in that space, but rugby in WA was feeling some tensions. 2016-17 was when the force was in some financial difficulty, which is why it ended up, you know, losing its licence to Rugby Australia, which is then when they cut the team. And so that changed Rugby WA, because the force was part of Rugby WA. There was the pro team and community. And so everything, were all the juniors, clubs, state teams, and the pro team were all in one big organisation. So that shifted it quite significantly. So, and again, if I use the term business failure, that sounds harsh, but in the end, we were in trouble. We asked for some support, and didn't get the support we thought we should have from Rugby Australia, and in the end, the business lost that major asset. So it went from a $13 million gross business to 1.5 in revenues with 2.5 million in costs. So voluntary administration, and I'm the sort of senior bloke left, so last man standing. I take on the grand role of CEO, and we carried then forward to restructure that. My commercial skills were kind of useful in that. We had some generous support, some very good partners, not least of which is Andrew and Nicola Forrest, who then evolved their own vision for, you know, a new form of rugby. But where we've ended up 3 years on is the Western Force is re-established as a professional rugby franchise, courtesy of Andrew and Nicola, and all hail them. The organisation of Rugby WA only has to sustain community. The force is sustained by its own partners and sponsors. So we're two separate businesses, but the community business is in a sound place. Some new people, some more experience, different levels of revenues and has been able to put some money in the bank to give it some basis and substance as it moves forward.
And you just finished up there quite recently.
Yes.
So
I'm a week and a half into it, and if you're wondering why I've got a sunburned face, it's because I play golf today. How good?
so
Not very well.
How'd you go round?
Not very well. I went around and around. Full value golfing, I call it.
it's a hot day for it.
Yeah.
Can I ask, so you must have been keeping a bit of an eye on Scotch rugby over the last few years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've got down to a few games over the last, because it's been some pretty stellar years for Scotch rugby.
And really pleased to see that. It's a nice journey for the school, and very pleased for that. I'd like to see more success across some of the other PSA schools. There's no good having a 1 or 2 team comp. So rugby as a whole, I would like to see more of, and that's sort of partly, where I've been trying to work on that. But I'm also a lifelong fan down at a very close club, associates, and I encourage all collegians to come down and join the club. It's the next step.
You don't strike me as someone who is going to stop learning or taking on a new challenge. Have you got any other big challenges in mind?
Yeah, it's that's an interesting one. There's always, I found through whatever I've done, and I guess in some parts it's when I do some consulting with different companies. They might have asked me to come and do a presentation, a keynote, or a bit of a workshop around, how can they get their team, and I've got a framework that I do some interactive stuff in that. But then I'm always impressed with, what is their business? What's their knowledge point? What are they doing? Why are they in a business that's adapting? So for me, one of the stepping stones in this sort of this gainfully unemployed period is again, look better at some of the technologies. Things like podcasts. How are these being used differently to the old one-on-one session? I think things like how communications mediums evolved through COVID has been good for a business, but it's also adapted.
It's forced people to change a lot.
Yeah, look, it has, and change doesn't happen easily, Steve. People, much as we say we're all change champions, the reality is we're actually creatures of habit. So I think some of the adaptive ways of how a workplace will engage with its workforce. There's a great strength in being, present, collegiate. Meetings over Zooms or teleconference lose a lot of body language and some of the stuff that is really, really useful around how a team works if you're not picking up some of the bylines because it's on a screen. So those sort of things are areas that I think will interest me. The ongoing adaptation of technology and how it's used by people, what's the next app and how does that simplify things, or does it actually create a problem?
Do you keep an eye on sort of all the latest military technological advances? Because the military tends to be sort of often 10 steps ahead of everyone else in regards to technological change.
Yeah, look, it invests in stuff that won't necessarily have a commercial application first up.
Yeah.
If it's there for force capability or warfighting or intelligence gathering or whatever, it will get a development budget that you wouldn't necessarily if someone was only doing that for commercial value. Once it evolves, then people go, right, we can use that commercially.
Do you think we're still on the cutting edge in that respect? Our military technology as compared with other countries. I mean, obviously.
Yeah. Look, I think Australia really genuinely punches well in its class, and does it. We're not a large massed military capability. We're smaller, smarter, therefore need force elements that can be small, but have a highly capable and effective impact.
Well, we better run to some final questions for you.
Oh, the quick fire questions we've got for you.
Is there a clock on this?
This is Sam's favourite bit.
All right, so I think I want to start with this one. Deserted island.
Yep.
Besides the fact that you could probably make a fire, build a bamboo house, and catch 10 fish and whatever. What album would you take on a deserted island if you could only have one?
Yep, it'd be Best of Queen.
Best of Queen, very
Freddie
nice.
Mercury, and the gang.
Okay. All right. So you talked about habits. We are creatures of habit, but I'd like to ask you, in the last 5 years, has there been a particular habit or process that you've put in place in your life that's been particularly beneficial?
Yep. And it's just ensuring that I always have some exercise, some form of activity where I get out and do something, usually in the morning, that gets me up in the day. I've done that for years, but having a slight hip issue, I can't doing it as a run. So I've adapted and do a jog off, and the last couple of years I've been ski paddling. So just trying to make sure I'm out there and do something, but it's adapted to where I was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
All right. Another one. In terms of favourite books, or books you perhaps books you most recommend, that have most resonated with you, that have had a kind of profound impact on you. Yeah, look, this is an interesting one, and it's one that came out of, I guess, almost of parenting time, and it was a book by Cecilia Lashke, turning good boys into good men, and it was it revolved around some of the themes of parents getting off the bridge and letting boys, particularly in those adults, but also take some risks, do some things where they had a chance to make a decision and learn there was a consequence that wasn't fatal. Because she was relating it to her time as a prison officer in New Zealand, where she saw too many good boys who were then making their first risk decisions around alcohol, drugs, cars, those sort of things, where the consequences were way more serious. And it just resonated with me. It was a time when we were parenting, trying to, right, have we got all this right around our 3 fabulous kids, and also their friends and what was going on. So it was that whole business of it, and my wife's a professional educator, so she wanted to make sure that was also part of what they were doing at their school. Yeah,
it's really important. I think learning doesn't really occur unless there is failure occurring. So it's without failure and an urgency, they're the two things that you need to actually create learning.
Absolutely. If we keep getting it right, the reflection, the debris. Oh no, well, that went well. Oh, but no one actually did. Didn't matter. We got it right. Next, move on. Oh yeah. No, it's that whole review, reflection. You asked me about a feedback loop. That's a really crucial. After something's been done and won or run, still just having a good hard critical look at it is an important part of the learning loop.
Well, Bob, that's about us for time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming in, and no doubt we'll see you around.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it, Bob. Yeah, well, thanks for your time.